Hello, everyone. My name is Ben Demers. I'm an economic development planner with the City of Somerville, and I'd like to welcome you all to the Gilman Square Civic Advisory Committee meeting of July 27th, 2023. I'm going to do some quick notes on GoToWebinar before we shift into the actual content of the meeting. So just note that this meeting is being recorded and it will be posted to the city's website within a few days. If you have a question at all during this meeting, and I see that we have a couple of attendees, but this is also true for panelists on today's call. If you have a question, you can either use the raise your hand function, or you can put a question in the question tab and I will call it out and read it so that everyone can hear it. So as I mentioned, my name is Ben Demers, and before we shift into the agenda, I'll also hand things over to Rachel just to say hello.
Hi everyone, Rachel Nakoni, Director of Economic Development.
Awesome. So if we want to read through our agenda first for this evening, so we'll start with a roll call and approval of previous meeting summaries. And I'll note for anyone watching that we currently have 5 members of the CIC present, which means we do not currently have a quorum, so we cannot come to consensus to vote this evening, but we can still move through our material in the agenda. We'll then move into our first public comment period. So there will be 2 public comment periods in this agenda. The first is generally limited to about 10 minutes, but then if there are still questions, we can talk more at the end of the meeting. We're going to then shift into reactions to the Rhode Island School of Design studio presentations that focused on Gilman Square. So we'll hear from a couple of CIC members that were at that meeting. And then city staff will give an update regarding the home and site and temporary programming process for that site that has been discussed in previous CIC meetings. And we'll also obviously leave time to discuss. Beyond that, we'll have room for other business not reasonably anticipated. So this primarily refers to if CIC members have business that they would like to bring to the meeting that we are not able to get on the agenda. And then we'll have the second public comment period and adjourn the meeting. Are there any questions up top from any CIC members? No, sounds good. So let's move into the roll call vote. So I started filling in a bit as we were sitting here. But I will read through the names of all members of the CIC, and please let me know if you are present. So first is Deanna Marsh. We cannot hear you, but I can see you.
I'm here. Sorry. Couldn't find the button.
Someone is unmuted and it's causing a bit of a static noise. Okay, it just turned off. Melinda Coney's messaged and said that she will not be able to make it. Next is Ram Keleth. Okay, so I will mark Ram as absent. Okay. Casey Babbitt is also not able to attend today. Jack Lister. Do not see Jack on. Lisa Natale. Jamie Cragnoline.
Here.
And I should say also, I apologize if I mispronounce anyone's name since I wasn't in that first introductory meeting, please let me know. Next is Jennifer Korber.
Here.
Brittany Vetter. Not in attendance this evening. Michelle is not going to be able to make it. Ben Elgard.
Here. Present.
Thank you. Councillor Jesse Klingon.
Present.
Thank you, Councillor. And then Councillor Ben Ewan Campen. Okay, Councillor Ewan Campen is not able to make it tonight. Okay. And then the other thing that I will move for is, so technically we can't move for approval of the meeting summary from February's meeting, but I do at least want to open the space if anybody had comments, anything they wanted to add to that meeting summary or anything they felt did not accurately reflect what we discussed. I can quickly, can you all see this okay? So if there is anything you'd like to reference, just let me know and I can scroll down. Seeing no comments. Just gonna mute quickly while I talk. Perfect. So then with that, I'm going to shift into our first public comment period. So I want to invite any members of the public that are here with us this evening. I see 2 attendees on the call. If you would like to make a comment, as I mentioned, you can either raise your hand and I'll prompt you to unmute yourself, or you can leave a question within the question tab of GoToWebinar, and I can read that question or comment out. I'll just give like 30 seconds to see if anyone raises their hand. So we got a question here from, I believe, Richard, asking, can you describe how RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design, became involved with the Gilman Square designs? Rachel, can I pass that one to you?
Absolutely. And is that a good transition also then into our next item as well? Perfect. So the class with the Rhode Island School of Design, we've worked with them for the last 2 years. It's a local professor who's a Somerville resident, and they are really just trying to our work with them has been focused on is just broadening the idea set, right? The professor has described it as their work lives halfway between reality and utopia. Their job as students is to think big thoughts and push the envelope. So we do not expect that any of the project work that they produced is translatable into the real world as it is, but that its purpose is to let us think about think about it from a different angle, and to look at the site from new perspectives, which I think they did succeed at. But definitely there's, they do operate in a student mindset, right? They can think big thoughts and they don't have to test it with engineers. So if you have looked at the work, if you're interested in connecting with the professor on their work, we definitely see it as ideation and not implementable projects.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. I'll leave another 10 seconds or so if anybody else would like to ask a question, but then we can shift into actually discussing some reactions from that RISD studio. Okay, so I'm not seeing any other hands go up, so I will shift into the next item on the agenda, which as mentioned is reactions to the RISD studio presentations on Gilman Square. So to give a little bit more context, the RISD students had their final review in May. The students did a lot of really fantastic work. They did a lot of designs focused on intergenerational housing models, on modular designs for housing, multilingual resource centers, various types of access points up to the School Street entrance of the Green Line, which were really great. Those included things like elevators and central staircases, but they also included one project had a ramp that sort of looped around the space. One of the limitations of this work with the RISD studios is that we're not currently able to share the designs publicly because it's student work, but we're hoping to in the future. So if we are able to organize that in the future, we'll definitely have someone from the studio come and present that work. But we did have a couple different CIC members sort of interact with the process at various points. So both Ben and Jennifer were able to attend the final review. And I know Deanna was able to attend the mid-review as well for the process. So honestly, I just wanted to open up this space and sort of hear those initial reactions. I'm curious if in either of those engagement points, the work that the students were presenting kind of helped you think differently about the space or what might be possible.
I'm happy to go first. I think one of the things that, my name is Jennifer Korber. I'm a resident and artist in the area. And I think one of the most interesting things I noticed about the presentations was that nearly no one envisioned a single large building, that it was mostly smaller, more human scale clusters of buildings. So they got a lot, they still had a lot of occupancy capability, but with much more of an open, more broken through building model. So because a lot of what we at the CAC had talked about previously was kind of, at least I had it in my head as a single large building. And even with step backs or whatever else was going to be in there, that it was still at its literal base a single large building. And I really loved some of the projects and the way that they rethought that approach to a parcel the size of the Homelands building, the Homelands lot. And then the only other thing I really wanted to call out was something that one student, only one student included a vision of what that space might look like at night. And so it was a very dark, dark background, but then it really evoked a sense of at night when people are coming off the tee or people are coming home from work or going out for the evening, just what that space might look like. And I love that image because it reminded us that this is a space that's going to be there both at night and in the daytime. And we have to think about what will it look like. And again, that more open, broken up space invited much more light to come through in that way. That I think a single large building would have looked very different. Not bad, just very different. So again, as far as generating new ideas, I think those two areas for me really stood out as places where things got very interesting.
I'd be glad to share some thoughts as well. Ben Elgart, both member of the CAC and also a board member of the Gilman Square Neighborhood Council. So I actually found my notes from the presentations, which as I read them, I'm like, wow, I apparently took a lot away from it. So I thought I'd share it with everyone. You'll see it kind of covers a lot of ground, but I figured hopefully it'll bring you into the world that was shared, the worlds that were shared with us. Because a lot of the, one thing is a lot of the executions from the different students, it really covered a lot of ground. They were really leaning into different aspects. And I'll kind of circle back to some of my takeaways. But some of the things we saw was like art spaces, studio living, working spaces, rehearsal space, performance space. And one of the things about that was interesting was space for noise, that people could actually live, and how do people actually live? What does it take? And as Jennifer was saying, that's not noise all the time, but it ebbs and flows. And a lot of the concepts we saw were very cognizant of that, or trying to lean into that. We saw some innovation around community or shared kitchens. And just the idea that, again, how do you have physical spaces that invite community and collaboration? We saw it in that way. Another way we saw it was the idea of a welcome center for social services. In particular, we saw some ideas around that for immigrant services. But I think we've also talked about this as, it's very daunting to go into City Hall. Some of you don't know your way around. If you're unfamiliar, who's going to help you? So even the idea that people come and go in a square, how can we be an introduction to something like City Hall or other organizations? I also remember we saw at least one concept that was like all these wonderful nonprofits right there. We also saw some concepts around that were very physically enticing, with skywalks and elevated plazas and floating triple deckers that were reminiscent of other shapes and forms in our neighborhood. So while I was not particularly honing in on like the physical manifestation of these ideas, these designers certainly were, and it was cool to see where they were taking things. And to Jennifer's point, like if you were thinking about big boxes, well, don't worry, they weren't. So and that was very provocative. And again, I also took notes on the idea of illumination and how do people circulate at night in the dark. How can we support people in that to make it accessible at late hours or wintertime when everything's dark way too much. We also saw concepts that, Ben, you're doing amazing taking notes. We also saw concepts that had like public spaces, semi-public, private spaces. They really ran the gamut and really tried to think about what did that mean for making space that works for different audiences. That, one concept I really liked, and I remember this pretty vividly, I think it came later in the day, was this idea of using circulation from the train station to really connect with everyone who we see coming and going. And this idea that like right now we're kind of at this early stage of what does it mean to have a train stop, but like one day it will be more people coming and going to important things in this part of the city, and how can building up and around the train station really take advantage of that. So people come and go at different times. What's the frequency? How are people visiting? How can people get to know the neighborhood slowly but surely by coming and going? Like a lot of that was wrapped up in that concept, and it was kind of great. And then there was also thought around ownership, management, and maintenance, that building something is not enough, that these are ongoing, you constantly have to maintain, rebuild. And so what does that look like? How do we think about that? And it was really wonderful that they were worried about it, because again, these were great ideas that we should take with us, that someone will have to figure out. And so kind of as I looked at this, I'm like, some of the major takeaways for me were that it was very provocative. And so one of the things I really do hope that more people get to see these ideas, because it really does challenge your assumptions about what we heard. I mean, did we hear about like people could live there and people want to eat food or snack there? Yes, we've heard that too. But and like people who are otherwise disadvantaged in our society should have a home in that space. Yes, we heard that. But we were challenged to think in other ways about what would that actually look like, and how do these people who we're worried about live day in, day out. So it was really valuable. The other thing I think I saw a bit is just in terms of designers taking on a project, they had to come up with a concept. And we have not really said like, what should our concept be for the square? Like, what do we want it to be, or for these properties in the square? How can Gilman Square have an identity, and what can a concept bring to that? And so I think we saw it because they were trying to make a point. They had to distinguish their work from the fellow students that they were working with. They had to have a point of view. They were only exploring certain themes, so they really needed to lean into them. But I think we also might think about, what do we really need to celebrate to make sure that Gilman Square is known for something, and that people know to return here, and how can we build off of what we already had? And I think we have some of that. We like, this is the place that people could best connect with existing, municipal functions just up the hill, right? So how do we extend that? Or I think another thing that we've talked about, of course, is like artists, the legacy of artists in our neighborhood, and celebrating that. How can we build on that? I think these are great ideas, and not the only ideas we've talked about, but I just really liked the idea that, not only can we use the ideas that they had, but how did they share those ideas through theming them? And it's something we can think about that for advancing ideas around Gilman Square.
Yeah, the specific phrase I remember from that was, that part of it was, Gilman Square becomes a face for the services available in Somerville. And they almost saw it, several of them almost saw it as an extension of the Central Hill campus for cities, not city government, but city services. So,
So yeah, as I'm Diana Marsh, I'm also on the CAC. I went to the mid-year review for the studio like in March or something, and I was going to go to the final one and then I couldn't make it. So unfortunately, I didn't see the final results, but I did visit the professor in his studio here in Somerville and got a quick glimpse of them through that. So that was really amazing to see. And you know, I agree with the summary, and Jennifer and Ben already gave a great summary. But another thing that I think was so valuable from their models and their plans was that they had built a whole 3D model of the topo and the way the hill goes uphill and where the high school is and the height of the train platforms and all this stuff that, like, we've talked about needing to understand how things can step up the hill, or how things should sit into the grade or be hidden below the hill and that kind of thing. And so they have all that information in their model, and I thought that was really interesting to see. And they had some really clever ideas of like how to help improve accessibility through the middle of the site, and so that you don't just have the two side entries into the train station, and how to use that to help improve the connection to the high school through different open spaces and different levels, you know, with elevators or escalators and things like that. So I would love to see more of that. And I also liked how the studio I went to, they were talking a lot about a lot of study they had done on like cooperative housing and alternative ownership models, and like housing in Scandinavia and other places that's like done and owned differently. So I thought that was all really fascinating and interesting. And it seems like a shame that we can't see any of their material. But I know the professor thinks that the professor doesn't want the students to be taken advantage of by anybody or have their work kind of used for free, which I understand. But on the flip side, if they're graduating and they're looking for jobs and everything, you know, they might want to show their work and they might want to have it in a public venue. I mean, of course, it's for them to decide, but I would think they might want to have it in a public venue where people could all see it and they could say, "Oh, wow, you had a great idea. Can we talk to you further about your idea?" And come up for us. So, that's how it is. And I think like their diagrams and their massing studies and things, as Ben kind of said, would be really interesting if we could use that kind of information to help think about the RFP that the city will eventually do for the site, and to help us think about, well, exactly how much can fit here and how much can we expect to have of retail or housing, and how much open space can we reasonably ask for, and what can you fit if you have the mobile site or you don't have a mobile site. So I think having that kind of concrete information and being able to test it the way the students did would be really useful. That's it.
Just to follow up on the getting access to the material, I do have a follow-up with the professor next week, and I will ask if there's been where he's at with the university, because part of it is also that if like the rights belong to the students and to the university, right? And so they have to kind of come to a consensus about how they're going to publish the work through the university process. And so there is a chance that they will be in a position where they can publish and allow us to talk about it with the visuals. But we have to let that play out. Because yeah, the first year, we didn't even get this level of access. The first year they had some changes in policy between year 1 and year 2 that allowed us to have a little bit more public engaged, including members of the CAC engaged in the second year. Because in the first year, the work really focused on laying out open spaces. And just one of the reflections from that conversation was that I thought was completely fascinating was several of the students from that year, they were all about like, where do we place like the open space? Like where does the open space want to sit on this site? And the one that stood out to me that I never would have thought of without their thinking was, what if you place the open space towards the train station? And I think some of the projects this year picked up on that as well. And it was kind of interesting. It was like, for a lot of people, they're going to arrive via the station. And so having that like something public to look at when you're standing on the platform and not the back of a building was something that they were really resonating with. And I think that also led to a lot of this, like divvying it up into multiple sites, multiple buildings, so that you can have multiple open spaces, get you through the plazas. Sorry, Jennifer.
No, I was just going to say, I remember at least 2 different proposals. Both had, there were still buildings. There wasn't like green space facing the station, but it was main entrances to more of the community services pieces. So those, like the more residential or retail spaces were on the Medford Street side, whereas the more community services pieces were much more on the train station side. And then there would be very natural, they both included very natural movement from those public services areas to the more green space, retail, residential, what have you, pieces. So yeah, no, I did note that as well. And they did it more through terraces or boardwalks or that sort of thing, as opposed to more open space in terms of like green space. So.
Yeah, and a lot of, I think there was the other thing there's some folks really did think about, which I know has come up in this context too, right? Like what is a public space that's interior to a building? How does that work? I think that lends itself also to what Ben, you were saying about the like ownership and maintenance and management pieces, is like if it's public, but it's interior to a structure that's otherwise private, how do you make that feel public?
Definitely that. I think the other thing that we heard about was, I think one of the earlier concepts that I saw had like almost, it was like, what do I want to, okay, so this is I know everyone goes to Davis Square, but where the Life Alive is now, where ABP used to be, there's like that covered walk that you can go under. And even they were thinking about like, what does it mean to be open like a plaza versus covered versus, you know, the storefronts underneath. That's like varying degrees of access. And so some of that's very conceptual, but like even the idea of like, you know, as you make your way towards the venue, the store, whatever it is, the organization, that's increasingly less accessible to people just window shopping. But these are all different ways that we engage spaces. I will also add that I did think there have been other concepts floating around through the conversations that we had before the CAC did get started that had more buildings. So I know not everyone might have seen those concepts, but you know, it was good to see strong thinking about, you know, how does it become more human scaled? How can we make sure that between many buildings can we service all the different goals we have? I think we saw some of that in this work as well.
Yeah, and before the CAC, I know when we very first started, so it's probably been a while since folks cracked these documents, but there was the zoning study, and the zoning study looked at a few different concept layouts, some with multiple buildings, some with one building, and sort of looked at what, you know, like what does that look like in space, and that was also provocative to see, you know, what could fit.
One thing I'll add is that seeing individual concepts from these different designers, since they did have a point of view, they did a very good job of not trying to meet every possible need that we know exists in Somerville, that we know exists in our corner of Somerville. And it was kind of a relief in certain ways. It was a relief to know that we don't have to, this does not have to do the heavy lifting to fix all of Somerville, and because it can't. And I think that was a really healthy takeaway, that it does not have to be all things to all people. There are certain things we know that are great for that spot. There are certain things we know that will serve our greater community that can also exist in that spot. And you know, eventually we'll have to we get to be a part of winnowing that down. Other people, the developer who actually takes on whatever gets built, will also be playing a part in that as well. But just that, like, again, ultimately we do need a point of view, and that'll only serve being in this space.
Awesome. Well, I tried to capture as much of that as possible. Probably a little bit wordy on the slide, but it'll be good for anybody not here. But yeah, thank y'all for those who are able to attend. And we'll let you know if we do hear anything about being able to share the work in more detail, because as everyone's been saying, the designs were pretty fantastic. So it'd be great to actually get to see them. With that, I'm going to shift into our next agenda item, which is an update regarding the home insight and temporary programming process. And I'm going to hand things over to Rachel to talk more about this.
Okay, sorry, 1 second. Just too many things open and I'm looking for the right notes. So as you all know, or most likely most of this group knows, the Winter Hill School is closed for the coming year. This is new information for anyone. Okay, didn't figure, but just wanted to double check. So with that, the Winter Hill School is going to be moving into the Edgerly over in East Somerville. The programs that are in the Edgerly are going to be moving out. We have, sorry, 1 second, my notes that I had, which were nicely, neatly organized, are escaping me. There we are. With that happening, we've sort of been we've been operating really in this crisis management mode. How do we make this all happen quickly so that it is a smooth transition to the new school year for all the students and the families that are impacted, many of whom are your neighbors and yourselves as well. How this ties into our conversation is that the home insight is the nearest open city property to the school. I don't know what that means. And I wanted to share that with you all, that we don't know what that means yet. But we want to make sure that we aren't moving too fast, that we miss an opportunity to speed up that process. An open site, when you're dealing with construction, is an incredibly valuable asset. It could mean, but I don't know what that means or if it's going to mean anything. Because we're in this crisis management mode, the sole focus right now is let's get to a successful September 1. Let's get those students in seats for the start of the school year. Once we get past this phase and we have an opportunity to really start thinking about what comes next for the Winter Hill School, I'll be able to get the right folks in the room to get an understanding of, does the home insight have value to expediting Winter Hill School reopening, or does it not? But I wanted to let you all know this because it does mean that we can't just keep going at the moment on what the future of the site looks like until we get to have that conversation. Because I just don't know if they're going to come back and say, that site's going to be so helpful to have construction lay down, or have our construction offices, or have a modular, or have, sports practice. I just don't know what that could look like yet. And with so many unknowns, it just feels a little premature to keep moving at full tilt on our process until we have a minute to have those people come back to the table and be part of the conversation. And I want to just make sure I got that message out to all of you as part of this, because I know you all have been working hard on this. There's a lot, we've been having really great momentum on these conversations. We've been talking with the broader community, but we do have this sort of inflection point for not only this site, but many projects where we sort of have to take a pause, let Winter Hill School, let that crisis pass, get past it, and then regroup. Any questions on that?
I have a question. Has there been any developments about the ARPA application? I mean, are we equipped to move forward? Or is it possible to move forward in other ways? And I'll also extend that to be like, while I do know that the home and site property is what you're particularly talking about being opened or not open, we also have the hill, right, as well, green space over there. When I think about temporary activation, I think of the intervention being as important in addition to the space. And I'm hoping that, something can be activated sooner rather than later. So when things are available, we'll have more insight to lead with. So I guess it's a two-part question, but they're thematically related.
Yeah, great question. So, and yes, that's the second part of this update. So just in this last week, we did get word we are going to be able to move forward with putting in an ARPA, putting out an RFP through ARPA funding to do some placemaking. As part of that though, it is going to be actually a part of a broader, like there's a part of speeding that up and moving that out is that it's going to be part of a broader program of placemaking. So Gilman Square will be one of the primary focus areas, but there's going to be a couple of others, and with the hope that we are bringing on a placemaking team that can do sort of focus here in Gilman Square. There's a small site at 90 Washington as well, and then simultaneously to bring that bring their programming expertise to other parts of the city. So there'll be sort of two sites where they'll do sort of a deeper investment and actually think about like furniture, like making us space. So we want to have them prepared for that, and that might mean that we're not looking. We'll see as we sort of get that. We're going to start with our RFP, get somebody on board, and as we get into those conversations, talk about is that going to be on the home site, or is it going to be on the green space, or is it potentially green space and like closing Medford Street occasionally? We've talked about that in the past. But yes, like Gilman will be one of the primary sites that is going to touch, but it won't be just Gilman. It'll be Gilman plus program for the whole city.
So would that mean that, I mean, you said that we're precluded from planning anything on the main home and site because of the possibility of Winter Hill School. So does that mean that if there is any temporary use here, it would only be on the green, on the park next to Pearl Street?
It's an unknown. I think my hope is that once we get past September 1 and, the evaluations at Winter Hill School there are folks who are evaluating the Winter Hill School to figure out what's needed, that as all of that comes together in the next couple of months, we'll just know more. Just at the moment, it's such an unknown that it's like I don't know what I don't know yet kind of position.
How does it, because I know grants don't necessarily move particularly quickly, so it doesn't sound like it's going to require dragging our feet on planning much more than waiting for the grant itself would. Is that accurate, or?
So with the ARPA grant, yes, we just at this point, I need to just do the procurement to find what we're calling it's probably like a tactical urbanism team, placemaking team, right? Somebody who's skilled, it's not just someone like, we don't need someone necessarily who's like, we need someone who understands designing a space, but more about designing a space for event, like turning that into events, right? Like one of the ideas that's been floating for a long time is like, if we were building furniture, can we build that furniture with the high school? Like if we're doing a mural, can that mural be something that is a community activity that people can come out and participate in, right? And so we want somebody who's really thinking about that participatory nature of placemaking.
So it also sounds, so the idea that it's still test and learn is still primary to this. So like, while we have to make sure things aren't going to break with people playing with them, it's not like an enduring thing. It's like we're doing interventions to learn from them I guess the part that I'm not clear on is if part of it, if it really is still rooted in placemaking, what I understand if you're saying, hey, Gilman Square isn't the only place we need to learn about. Let's get a handle on what people expect from 90 Washington Street. Okay, I get that part, but I'm not quite sure what other places outside of the specific places that we want to focus, what that does. Is that just saying like, who are the people coming and going in Somerville, or what?
Yeah, I think it's what we've been thinking about it more of is on the activation side for those other locations, that those places, what we're thinking about is like if you're Broadway and East Somerville, right? Like, can we be, one of the other things that we are going to be working on as part of the economic development ARPA bucket is some marketing for the squares in general. And we don't know what that looks like yet. We're trying to find a consultant who can help us. We have that out right now. We're looking for a consultant who can help us think about marketing strategies for the squares of Somerville, right? And so we were thinking about it from the perspective of, okay, bringing people to the squares is part of that, right? And so while the focus is going to be on 90 Washington and Gilman Square in terms of the like placemaking design work kind of stuff, like the physical infrastructure, those activations like hosting a dance class, yoga, Zumba, whatever it might be, that kind of programmatic work, we have other places in the square that can already host those kinds of events.
Got it. So, sorry, but to make sure I'm understanding this, it's like almost like what's a mature square? How does it work in a more mature square? So it's almost like a counterpoint to all our square. It's still about our square. It's just like you can't only learn from what we have now. So we need to kind of activate in a more advanced square to see what's it like when you have more of that energy, more things already there, and then we can get into those other questions. Okay. Are all the places, I'll say, on this side of the city, or do they really cover the whole gamut, whole city?
I think at this point, we've been sort of thinking it as a whole, we need an expert.
Okay.
I think that's part of it, right? Like we need somebody who's really expert at this, because there are some spaces that are going to lend themselves very nicely to this, right? And for this testing. But there are other spaces where maybe the testing is like, can it work? Like, how complicated, like there's, like some of our mature spaces, I think about Statue Park, like the Statue Plaza in Davis Square, right? Like we know that works for events because the Arts Council runs events there.
Yeah.
But there are other spaces that we haven't really tested the waters yet, and we might come to the conclusion like, oh yeah, that space isn't gonna, too small, or like that plaza in that park, not happening. There's no power, right? Like part of this is going to be sort of testing the waters in other places. Then your questions are really helpful for thinking about what this is going to look like as an RFP.
Okay. Yeah, I was getting all defensive. I'm like, if we have to learn more about what's happening in Davis Square, so help me. Like, but I think there are a lot of other squares, your Ball Square, your Magoon Square, right? What's happening down Broadway? Like, I'd love to know more about them. I'd love to hear what it means for us as we figure out who we are, who they are. I think that's all part and parcel for building up kind of the network of squares over here.
Yeah, that's what I was, that was something that was coming to my mind as Rachel was talking, is that, my city background tells me that sometimes it's easier to get money for a big project, not a small project. And by making it about the city of Somerville, then that's information we can apply to Gilman Square and also more broadly to the rest of the city and other places, so that further work can be done to help with that. Is that a reasonable kind of interpretation of why it's part of this larger piece?
Yeah, I think it's this connection of, right, like we have most of our squares don't have an infrastructure for events, right? Beyond like the occasional really big event, right? So like Davis Square has events, Union Square is, they've got the main streets that are pulling it off, some seriously large events. But you're right, like Teal Square, Lagoon Square, Ball Square, like what would it take in these other neighborhoods as well? Gilman's kind of in the middle. There's more there's more social infrastructure in Gilman than there are in some of the other small squares as well. Councilor, are you trying to say something?
So I have a question, Rachel. Can we just reset the clock for a minute? Like, since we're all here, or well, not all of us are here, but just in terms of the Gilman Square neighborhood plan that came out in 20, so whatever it was, 16. Where I know we're talking a lot about sort of short term and programming for the square, but where are we with the overall neighborhood plan that we currently have in place?
We should take a look at the broader pieces. This is the city-owned sites are some of the biggest components of the neighborhood plan, and certainly the pieces that needed the most rethinking once the station changed. Because the original layout, and if you go back to the neighborhood plan, showed a totally different layout of the street and these properties as a result. In terms of street design, I think Raviola presented on the street design at the last community meeting. That is well developed, but it's not at construction level. And then in terms of the rest of I'm trying to think if there's anything else.
Well, just just in terms of this body, like what the purpose of this body was in terms of moving forward on some sort of plan. Again, where are we in that process as to whether or not we're going to do taking of the mobile station or anything like that? I hear what's happening with the Winter Hill, and I would anticipate the Winter Hill situation probably once the feasibility study comes out, like in the fall or something, they might have a better idea of what the need might be for that, to use that space. But like, why couldn't we still simultaneously work towards the longer range goal of moving forward and helping development in the square?
Yeah, so the focus of this particular body is only on the city-owned properties and the question of the taking. What's tricky here is that and for the next couple of months, we just don't know. And the problem the thing I'm struggling with, Councillor, is the question of the timing. We'll know when they get that feasibility study what that means in terms of our timing to pull the trigger and move forward. My hope is that it's going to come back and say, all good to go. We don't need to worry about Homans. It's not something that needs to be considered. But until we get that assurance, I personally don't feel that we are in a place where we have enough information to make a strategic decision. Because it could come back, and the what if to me is like, what if they come back and they say, actually, the school needs to be completely rebuilt and we need something, and that site is suddenly incredibly valuable for a couple of years.
Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, I hope that that's not the case. But the last question I have is, in the short term, again, with the programming, after it's decided that if we don't need the space and we're talking about programming while we're also talking about the longer term plans, does the Holman site, because I had heard something about like the Holman site, even just to have like events on, would need to be cleared in terms of like environmental cleanup situation, or is that?
There was a request to do some investigation of the environmental conditions for it to be occupiable for events. The other thing is if we were to use the Holman site for events, it would need a different surface because gravel is not an accessible surface.
But with that same environmental thing, like would that also be a factor in the use of it for the school, like purposes of the school?
Possibly. Yeah, I think it depends. It depends what that were to come back at, right? If if it's valuable for something like, you know, storing materials, probably not.
Okay. All right. That's all I have. Thank you. Yeah, those are just kind of updates. It's been a while since we really plugged into Gilman Square here. I do know one thing that people probably won't like. I just happen to know, it's out of my hands, is that or maybe they like it, maybe they won't. I don't know. But TZ is doing that work on Broadway, and they actually they wanted to use the stock market lot. They couldn't get anything going with them, but I do believe they have a deal with Barack from ABJ to like temporarily use that space for equipment, you know, to go up to the work on Broadway or whatever.
It's there. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
already there.
Yeah, so it's unfortunate, but it shouldn't be that long. I don't think the, you know, I don't know what Barack's plans are moving forward. You know, I know we have to stay on the agenda here, so to speak. So I don't know if there's maybe at the end there's a room for an update with the Jim Kaplan, like the settlement or whatever, if it's public now, you know, because separate from this body's work, which is on that, I think, which is on the renewal plan, or, you know, on the city side, on the city's parcels, you know, maybe there's, I don't know, if there could be an update on that, it'd be great. Otherwise, I'll just, you know, do it offline. But I just think for the purposes of Gilman Square as a whole, that is a determinant factor for many, you know, for many things that happen in the square.
Yeah, Councillor, I would definitely suggest that you connect with Sarah Lewis and Tom Galagani. I don't think Ben or I have enough depth on what the situation is there.
Okay, understood.
Okay, is there anything else you wanted to add, Rachel, or?
No, but thank you all so much for your patience with us as we sort through this, and I apologize for the I don't knows, but it is where we are.
Yeah, and I guess kind of related to this, because we're not sure the timeline at the moment of when we'll have updates, I kind of wanted to check in about how you're interested in getting updates, and essentially if you'd rather wait until we're ready to meet again and have more concrete updates, or if you have appreciated the monthly updates saying we're not meeting this month, but XYZ thing might have changed in the meantime. Because I mean, so the reason that we haven't hosted meetings over the last few months is just not having a substantive update. I've just wanted to be as respectful of people's time as possible, but I also understand that was a longer period than I think anybody anticipated when we met last in February, and that people are very invested in this project in this neighborhood. So I don't mean to, you know, go radio silent on those sorts of things. So I guess I'm just curious to hear from CIC members, like what feels like the best type of communication. Like did you appreciate having monthly updates, like if we're not going to be meeting? And did you also appreciate waiting to meet until we really felt like we had more of a substantive update?
Definitely appreciated the monthly updates. I do wonder if maybe we want to say if we go more than 2 months without a meeting, just have one just to get people's faces together and have a space for conversation. Even if there's not enough for a full meeting, I'd rather meet for a half an hour and open up a possibility of something rather than feel like we've forgotten what everybody looks like and it's fallen. And more importantly, you know, looking at how many people weren't able to make it tonight, when it falls out of people's regular rotation of things they have to do, it's harder to keep that space clear. So by having it at least once every 3 months, then that might be a way to help with that.
Yeah, riffing off of that, like Rachel, Ben, you did a great job of getting people together from different parts of the community. And I think it's important for us to see each other's faces, to continue to talk. I don't want this, even if we're not making decisions, I think to Jennifer's point, it's really important for us to come together, because part of being able to make decisions is being able to connect, to build our relationships. And so we got to keep that going. The monthly reminders are helpful to be like, oh no, this is something on my to-do list of things I need to attend to, even if nothing's happening right now. But if we can think of ways, as Jennifer put, to share, to build that space with one another, I think that's great.
Did anyone else want to add anything?
I'll just chime in that I also think it's nice to have the monthly updates by email. I'd be willing to attend monthly meetings too. I think it's good to have, or you check-ins every few months if there's something else going on. I think it's good to keep the momentum going. And I know we seem to have lost, well, I don't know if we've lost the people. We've had so few meetings, it's hard to say, but I don't know whether we're losing some of the people on the committee or not. But I also know that I think that we have like 2-year terms and they like technically end like next February or something. So I don't even know how many meetings or whether we're even going to accomplish anything, kind of specific by then, and what you guys are going to do when that period arrives. You might need to add more people to the committee at least.
Yeah, I'll just say that I also, the less frequency of the meetings, if there's nothing to cover, works for me. And I agree that, well, not agree, I was going to say the lack of participation, I forget what not just what the terms end, Rachel, but I think isn't there like a certain number of meetings or time frame that if you miss, like, like we can replace people. And I do think there's probably some interest out there. I know that I've some interest from Pearl Street Park folks. I'm not sure what slot that these things will satisfy. I know there's some play there too that you can kind of play around with that. But as I think once we ramp up, when things start to pick up again, we can make another push to get check in with members and make some replacements.
Yeah, that's exciting. That's a good thought. I think once we get past September, we've sort of already been aiming for like probably not an August meeting because it's scheduled for the last week of August. But that maybe by the time we are scheduled to meet in September, maybe we'll have some more information about where things are going to fall with Winter Hill School. No guarantees, but we can at least see if there's something there, and maybe look at where we are on recruitment, and if there are folks who want to officially pull themselves off the list at this stage.
Yeah, I'll also be more explicit in the next email that I send out. I normally get message back if people are not coming, but I can also just say, let me know if you're coming. And if anybody doesn't get back about that within like the few days before the meeting, I can just keep following up with messages. Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate this kind of feedback. It's very helpful for us to just hear like what feels best in terms of communication. So I appreciate it. With that, I'm going to shift into the 5th item on our agenda, which is other business not reasonably anticipated. So as I mentioned in our walkthrough of the agenda, this is mostly a space for CAC members if they would like to bring anything else that they were not able to communicate and get on the agenda ahead of time. So I will open it up if anybody has anything they would like to add.
guess I'll say something that I've been thinking of. I know in the beginning, and I think I've said this before, and when we started off, there was like talk about having a consulting firm that was like a real estate or economics consulting firm or something like that, talk about, I think it was HRNA maybe, look at to show like prototypes or help talk about what would be feasible here, like from a conventional market standpoint. And I think if we could continue with that kind of information, it would be a good counterpoint to the students' work too, for example, because theirs is like super creative and you know, no limits and really great for thinking about all the possibilities. But I think it's also important to keep in mind like the economic reality of what is actually going to happen here. And you know, like if there's an RFP someday and we put all these great goals in there, what we want to have, and then nobody wants to bid on it unless they can build like one giant building, then we want to be prepared. I mean, we don't want to have that happen, but like we want to be prepared to know what is likely to come in and address that beforehand, saying like you need to break down your building size or have open space in this location, that kind of thing. And I think by testing it with a firm like that, or maybe talking to other developers or something, it will help us get more of a handle on what's likely to come in. And then of course the city, I'm sure, is thinking about like how much is a developer going to have to pay for the land, or is it going to be free, and what other things like that can be done to subsidize development so that they can do something really creative and cool, and not just like maximizing the yield from the site. So I would love it if we could kind of go through that as a committee, but I mean, that's seems to have been delayed.
I have two items. The first is in response to Jesse's question about other things going on in the square. It's my understanding, we haven't come together in a while, so I'm not quite sure what other people know, but through the Gilman Square Neighborhood Council, I think we learned that the Jim Kaplan does have the, I'll say, right or can make changes to his first floor to make it more suitable for with windows. I know that that building is a very special building for the neighborhood. So the idea that it can become better suited for street traffic and activation is exciting. It is not the first thing he's doing next of the different work he needs to do. So none of us should be waiting on it, but it is something that should be possible. And I think there are also questions about whether or not it was zoned so that it could be used in more commercial ways. And my understanding is that it can be. So we want to offer that.
Yeah, I'll check in with Tom. I'm just mainly wondering if he's officially, capital F, dropped the lawsuit so that the two parties on the other sides can commence with whatever they want to do there. That's all.
Those are bigger questions I do not know the answers to. But I thought windows that I can offer the group. The other thing I wanted to share, and I hope Jesse, when you do find answers, I'd love to know as well. So I'm glad you're going to investigate further. The other thing that I wanted to share was also about our square. If you have been in Gilman Square in early fall, you probably have seen our block party because it's a huge success. There is great attendance. It's like huge. It is more of a festival than a block party. And we're anticipating the same this year. If you don't know the date for that, it will be on the 9th of September. It's called G23. Went through a little rebranding. The Gilman Square Arts and Music Festival. And it has a website. So all these are good things. The more immediate thing is that there's a fundraiser for making it the best festival that we can have this year. And that fundraiser is this Sunday, July 30th, from 12 to 3 p.m. And that's at Daddy Jones restaurant in Lagoon Square. So it will be on the patio. So there's a back entrance. You can also go through Daddy Jones and arrive at the patio. But it would be wonderful for folks to be able to show up. If your Sunday is flexible in that way, the weather will be great. So we'd love to see you there.
Can you say the date again in September, Ben?
Sure. So the festival is on the 9th of September.
Thank you.
More immediate, just making sure we got this right. This Sunday is the fundraiser. So Sunday, July 30th, 12 to 3, Daddy Jones. And just a reminder, in particular, if you're on part of the Civic Advisory Committee, you and your thoughts, your presence matters. You are vessels and vehicles for sharing information in the community. So we would love to see you there.
Nice, thank you, Ben. Is there anything else that anyone wants to share or bring up? Okay, not hearing anything. So thank you for sharing those. I will shift into the last part of our agenda, which is a second public comment period. However, the 2 members of the public that were with us are no longer here. So I do not believe we have any questions then. And that's the last item that is on our agenda today. So just as we're moving into adjournment, as Rachel mentioned, we're not planning to have a September meeting, but we've heard this feedback about wanting to make sure we meet every 2 to 3 months. So we'll see what sort of update we have.
August.
Sorry, we're not having an August meeting, my bad. Everyone looked relieved at that. So we're not having an August meeting, but we've heard this feedback, we'll look at what we have to discuss in September and what sort of update we have by that point, and can determine if an email update makes the most sense at that point. But I think the latest we want to be meeting is October based on the feedback that we heard. But if there's anything in the meantime that people want to bring to our attention, you always have our emails. Please just let us know. And with that, I will move to adjourn.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your time tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Night.